Joining us now is Yahoo Sports insider and also co-host of the Pull-Up Podcast with CJ McCollum. Jordan Schultz joins us as all guests. He appears on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Jordan, how you doing on this Wednesday?
Hey, guys, doing great. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you coming on. We were just talking in the last segment. I want to get your thoughts on it. Jalen Ramsey, first of all, very interesting read in GQ because GQ isn't asking the same questions that you or I or any of us sports fans are asking him per se. And literally the conversation just evolved. And I kind of want to get your perspective because you've interviewed tons of athletes. You work with CJ McCollum, each and every week on that podcast. So, kind of give us your perspective on the Jalen Ramsey GQ interview, what he said about the quarterbacks, and just your overall impressions.
Well, I was a little bit surprised. I spent some time with him before the draft a couple of years ago, and he seemed like, a very confident young man, which obviously has lent itself really well to the gridiron. But that mentality for me, I like it. He didn't need to say that stuff, and he probably created a firestorm that he maybe didn't need. But at the same time, he's already proven to be at 22 one of the best corners in the league. He's on a great defense on a potential Super Bowl team, and he's obviously speaking his mind. I'm curious as to how that got going, where he was, saying all this venomous stuff. Josh Allen's trash, Big Ben is decent. When he says, "Who is Matt Ryan?" The MVP. For me, I didn't have a problem with it, but now you have to imagine that even a Joe Flacco is going to come after him. So I was fascinated by it, and he's someone that he's backed it up. So for me, it's a non-issue.
When you look at guys when they comment on other players, again, you work with CJ, and CJ McCollum's a good guy. He's a very straightforward guy, but sometimes with athletes, it's kind of a aren't you sometimes walking a little bit of a line, trying to say, listen, I'm trying to get an honest an opinion out of you, but sometimes guys are not always open to that. So from your experience, how does someone interviewing an athlete kind of put themselves in a position to get the best out of that interview?
So the key with any athlete, I think, is you have to, not be intimidated, because if you're intimidated and the athlete doesn't feel like you're on any kind of level ground or same playing field, then you're not going to get a good interview. The other part of it is, we talk about athletes being confident, and Ramsey's saying, he doesn't care about having backlash, but the same thing goes with a journalist or a reporter. You have to know that your question might not go over very well with either the athlete you're interviewing or the audience. So, for CJ and I, we've had a friendship before the podcast, but now, sometimes I just have to ask him tough questions, and even when he knows I'm thinking about it, I still feel almost a little bit uncomfortable because I want to be respectful of it, but it's your job to ask that question. So I'm curious as to how, like I said earlier, how this came up in a non-sports magazine and what prompted Ramsey to kind of go off on that tangent. But I think it's great stuff. And like you said, you wouldn't expect it from GQ, but having read that twice now, his comments are pretty blatant.
You talked about how you knew CJ McCollum before you guys started doing the Pull-Up Podcast together. Has your perspective of either NBA players or professional athletes, or has there anything changed in your perception of the league or sports after doing some podcasts with CJ?
Have things changed the way that I perceive it, you're saying?
Yeah.
You know what? I wouldn't say it's changed, but I think what I have realized even more now, especially doing a mostly NBA podcast, is that the NBA itself is so far ahead of the NFL in terms of ownership, being progressive. Even the commissioner, Silver compared to Goodell is a significant difference. And I think the power that the players feel they have and are able to have in the NBA is much different than that of the NFL. And obviously we talk a lot about the anthem, but just as a whole, the way the league and the NBA has been collectively bargained compared to the way it was in the NFL 6 years ago is much different. So it's solidified that. We've had mostly NBA guests. We've had Michael Bennett, who's obviously an outspoken football player, and he said the same thing. The NBA is just, it's light years ahead, and that includes guaranteed contracts.
You mentioned how the league, the NBA, is different than the NFL and with the owners. I want to get your perspective on the Sixers organization as a whole. The Sixers are a big topic here in our area. And, this is a front office. They've gone through a few different general managers in the last several years. They're still looking for an official general manager moving forward. Josh Harris and his ownership group, it's a little bit of a different ownership setup than other teams in the NBA. What is your perspective of the 76ers as an organization?
Well, before everything happened with Brian Colangelo, there was a thought around the league that Philly was in, great hands, regardless of if you like Colangelo or not, just because of all their young talent. Then you have that, obviously disaster with Brian, and I reported a lot on that, and I felt badly for Brian. It's a terrible situation that he put himself in, and obviously the young talent that Philadelphia has is you could argue is second to none. I mean, who has better young talent? Maybe Boston? I don't know. I think the perception of the Sixers now, even without a GM, is that the team has a coach in Brett Brown who gets his guys to play hard, doesn't always have the great X's and O's, but has developed players. Fultz has apparently been very good this summer, from what I've been told. Embiid has gotten in better shape. Simmons is one of the best young players in the world. So if you think about that, and obviously the fact that last year they had this massive improvement, I think the perception is pretty good, and that says a lot considering they don't have a GM.
Jordan, it's funny that you mentioned Markelle Fultz because I've been ripped for a year plus because I've been on the Fultz bandwagon since his senior year at DeMatha. And, last year was very uncomfortable, not only for myself, but a lot of the Sixer fans that, were looking forward to seeing what a pure scoring guard could do in that Sixer offense. From what you've heard, recently around the league about Fultz, is this jumper back? Is it rebuilt? Is this guy ready to be with not only myself, but a lot of Sixer fans hope that he could be?
I think it is. He's so talented, and I'm from Seattle, so I got a good look at him when he was at Washington. And the thought process with Fultz was that he could play the pick-and-roll game, he could score, he could rebound, and he had the length and size and range to defend. And all of those things made him the number one pick. Now, what happened his rookie year was unfortunate. I mean, that was clearly a physical and a psychological issue, but he is super talented. And the fact that he has all this buzz around him is a big deal. I had a big source tell me that basically he was a totally different player, and that included the jump shot. And that was someone privy to Fultz's workouts with Drew Hanlon, who's obviously a pure sweat basketball and has worked out with them all summer. So you consider all the tools, to your point, that you saw at DeMatha, then at Washington, and then the fact that he's in a system now where they have proven, albeit young players around him, where the pressure, albeit high, is still not as high as it would have been perhaps somewhere else. So I think he's in a great position to have a big year.
Jordan, what kind of team can the Sixers be, assuming that all goes well and Fultz is back? He's a new player. What kind of team can the Sixers be competing with a Boston and now Toronto with Kawhi Leonard? Can they be a team that can, realistically challenge to represent the Eastern Conference in the finals?
I think so. I mean, Indiana's gotten better. Toronto, obviously, with Kawhi will be interesting. We had Jalen Brown on our podcast, and he guaranteed Boston, who's obviously made a compelling argument. But Philadelphia, bringing back Redick, the fact that they have the pieces they do, if Fultz is healthy and he's confident, you think about the pick-and-roll game and his ability now to spread the floor and then allow Simmons to still be the primary ball handler, but have somebody else that can create, is going to be a significant cause for them. I think Philadelphia is in a great position. My only question mark with them, which really was the same thing last year, is do they have enough wing talent? And that's obviously what Boston has in spades. But I think Philadelphia, another year under Brett Brown, another year for those guys to come together, and obviously Fultz, I think they have as good a chance as anybody, including Boston, to go to the finals.
Jordan, I wanted to back up real quick. Going back to your Markelle Fultz conversation, I know the summer workouts, he's working with Drew Hanlon. He's looking better. The jump shot is improving apparently, but to me, I'm more skeptical of that because he's in a gym by himself, and we have not seen him play. We didn't see him play in summer league. We have to wait till preseason /regular season to really get a full evaluation of him. I mean, are we jumping the gun here by saying he's this improved? I mean, to me, I can't go on that train until I watch the first 10, 15 games of the year and he actually looks like an improved player.
Right. I mean, obviously, when you're in a gym, and CJ says this all the time, and I played 4 years in college at a lower level, but I can tell you the same thing. It's totally different when you're shooting wide open shots in the gym than it is even in a pickup game, let alone an NBA game. I think you'll know, as Sixers fans, I think we'll all know really soon whether or not the full type is legitimate. I think some of that pressure that he felt last year, I would imagine would be alleviated just because they don't necessarily need him to be a good team. He would be great for them, and I can imagine as the number one pick he feels it. But for someone at 20 years old, for people to say that he's a bust, I think is unfair. I think you'll know within 5-10 games, to your point, whether or not he's back. But I believe he is, and I think part of that is obviously optimism. But as talented as he is and as young as he is, I just think he'll figure it out.
And for the Sixers as a whole in the Eastern Conference now, I do think they are one of the top 3 teams in the conference, maybe even a top 2 team in the conference. They could very well make the NBA Finals, especially since LeBron is now out west. But when I look at the Sixers as an overall team, they brought back J.J. Redick, which I was fine for. But the fact remains they didn't get LeBron, they didn't get Kawhi, they didn't get Paul George. And some of the moves they made in free agency, while they might have improved defensively, they might have improved in some areas, it seems like the Sixers did not take a step forward on paper. It seems like they're the same exact team. I really didn't actually say they actually got better this offseason, and then to me it remains to be seen.
Well, yeah, they only get better if Fultz is. You can basically look at Fultz like a rookie, as they did with Simmons last year, and then obviously we thought they were getting Mikal Bridges, and then that doesn't work out. So
don't get me started on that. I mean, I was high on Mikal Bridges. I mean, I'm still to this day feeling that.
Well, yeah, and I think he made perfect sense because of forget the fact that he's from there, just what he would bring them as a wing, and they're going to bet big on Zaire Smith, and obviously he got hurt, and now you're worried as a Sixer fan. Well, how is he going to be this year? But I think it all hinges on both. I mean, if they had the same team last year, then they'll probably win 50 games, but they're not going to beat Toronto potentially. They won't beat Boston and maybe Indiana. I think the Pacers will take a step forward because of some of their additions and the fact that Turner will be in better shape. I think Toronto's going to be better because of Kawhi, and then obviously Boston is just loaded. So there is some pressure on Philadelphia. I thought last year, though, with all these wins and that big improvement guys, that I thought they were a year away. And now you think about those guys getting 1 year older, and again, going back to Fultz. There's a lot to like about them. I don't think they're quite there to contend for a championship, but in terms of the East, them and Boston are the 2 most talented young teams.
Jordan Schultz joining us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline on 97.3 ESPN Yahoo Sports Insider. Follow me on Twitter at Schultz_report. Jordan, before we let you go, you're one of the people who reported earlier this week about the Browns' plans to bring in Dez Bryant later this week. I have to ask you because, it's kind of one of those speculations that are out there. How much do you think Dez's interest in the Browns has to do with what he's seen of the Browns on Hard Knocks?
I think with Dez, you never really know with him. He's going to visit them tomorrow. Some of it's probably there, yeah, but I think he's also been humbled. I mean, I know he turned down the Ravens offer, but I think he's been humbled by the lack of interest. I mean, I had said early on that the NFC East was not viable for him based on who I'd spoken with. And, you have not seen a lot of teams step up. So I think the way he saw Landry, his passion, and now some of the question marks with Josh Gordon, obviously now Corey Coleman's traded, so there's a receiver slot there that they didn't have. So I think part of it, yeah, but I also think Dez, realizes we're now at the second week of preseason. He still doesn't have a home, and at some point he wants to just play football.
Jordan, appreciate you joining us here on 97.3 ESPN. Always great insights. We always also enjoy the podcast with you and CJ, and you always have great insights as well on your Twitter account. Again, follow Jordan on Twitter at Schultz_report.
Tremendous podcast. Great job. Thank you.
I appreciate you guys. Thanks so much. Anytime.